Welcome back to another episode, all. Throughout this episode, I'm going to be debunking a few claims, a few little arguments of those who support eugenic thinking, that we should be doing eugenics. I'm going to explain why we shouldn't. The first argument which comes up of why we should do eugenics is we say we shouldn't let people with disabilities be born. But they claim that disability makes people suffer, but actually, no, it doesn't. Suffering is a conscious choice to begin with, and most of the suffering comes from society's attitude towards of how they look at disability. As from what I can see, there tends to be an underlying conspiracy in our society that disability automatically makes a life tragic. But when you actually ask disabled people themselves about their lives, you find that no, they actually like the quality of their life. They don't go say that they are suffering. It's entirely subjective altogether. I've even seen someone say that we should enhance IQ through genetic selection. And again, that's another ridiculous idea. First of all, IQ's got nothing to do with genes, and IQ tests are actually biased, such as in the 80s and 90s, they thought black people would never be as smart as white people. But what skin colour got to do with intelligence exactly? It's because, as I said, the tests are biased and they disregarded cultural diversity. And since all these black people were immigrants to the UK, but they're not familiar with how the English people use the language. So just because they spoke English doesn't mean they understand the English on the test. And so they were given a distinct disadvantage, and that's what gave them a lower IQ. And altogether, IQ does not equate to intelligence. Someone with the highest IQ score can still be the thickest and stupidest person in the world, such as these people supporting eugenics. Any of them could be the smartest of people, but what they don't seem to be realizing is they're suggesting that we should enhance and increase the pace to human extinction, that we should bring our species to extinction. And they probably don't realize that. Second of all, another reason why we shouldn't go doing all this genetic selection is because it will destroy genetic diversity, which is extremely dangerous. Just imagine that we're all genetically identical for a moment. What would have happened when the pandemic hit the earth? Once COVID-19 started, if we were all genetically identical, we would have been equally susceptible to the pandemic, and all of us would have died. Just allow me to turn to a book called The Darwin Effect. This talks a lot about the eugenics movement. Right, I quote, as J.B.S. Haldane proclaimed in 1932, a society of men that was uniformly perfect would still produce an imperfect society. The enormous genetic variety among humans and among plants and animals as well was important because it will always allow some individuals to survive different environmental changes. When the Pilgrims came over to America, a few had the genetic predispositions that enabled them to survive the alien environment in America with its foreign germs and new living requirements. Those that survived may not have been the strongest in the land from which they came, but were stronger in the new environment. If all those that came over were genetically identical, likely none of them would have survived. End of quote. That's it. Altogether, I think it's a very bad idea to go making us genetically identical as these eugenic thinkers are supposing altogether. And the next one is to say we should prevent diseases by destroying mutations, which again I think is a stupid idea. Just because if diversity is essential for survival, well, won't we need mutations in order to evolve? Now, I'm just going to read out another one from someone called Thomas Armstrong. I quote, Miroslav Radman writes, mutagenesis has traditionally been viewed as an unavoidable consequence of imperfections in the process of DNA replication and repair. But if diversity is essential to survival, and if mutagenesis is required to generate such diversity, perhaps mutagenesis has been positively selected for throughout evolution. Mutations have been demonstrated to produce new alleles, variations of a gene, that improve an organism's chance for survival in a given environment. Evelyn Fox Keller, Professor of History and Philosophy of Science at MIT, explains, we now know that mechanisms for ensuring genetic stability are a product of evolution, yet a surprising number of mutations in which at least some of these mechanisms are disabled have been found in bacteria living under natural conditions. Why do these mutants persist? Is it possible that they provide some selective advantage to the population as a whole? Might the persistence of some mutated genes in a population enhance the adaptability of that population? Apparently so. New mathematical models of bacterial populations in variable environments confirm that, under such conditions, selection favors the fixation of some mutated alleles, and furthermore, that their presence accelerates the pace to evolution. End of quote. So if the mutations enhance our adaptability, if they accelerate the pace of evolution, wouldn't that mean diminishing them would send us in the opposite direction, such that it would reduce that enhanced genetic stability? It would enhance the pace to extinction rather than enhancing the pace of evolution. So I see that as another stupid idea. And where people say mutations are wrong, someone called T.H. Morgan says, I quote, the discovery that the same mutation happens over and over again, not only within the same species, but in different species, is, I think, one of the most interesting discoveries in recent genetic work. It means that certain kinds of changes in the germ material are more likely to occur than are others. The appearance of new variations in the hereditary material is something less of a random process than we had hitherto supposed. Close quote. So if mutations are not random, which I don't think they are, they have been selected for a purpose. Like the sickle cell mutation that's been selected to protect humans from malaria. We've got so many other mutations that protect people from diseases, which is, it's just so unrealistic to claim that things like CRISPR and genetic selection can make someone immune to disease. Because if you change someone's genes, you're still going to be susceptible to diseases. It's simply going to be a different set of diseases. Like, say, Dr. Hay was sentenced for 3 years for editing embryos, Lala and Lolo. What we came to find was he removed the CCR5 gene, they became immune to HIV, but they also became significantly more susceptible to West Nile disease. So he actually made their health even worse. He did. Now, onto the idea of where we go saying, oh, we should have the best child. Well, just going and having the best child, everyone aiming for some specific child, that's going to reduce the genetic diversity again, which is going to result in extinction by making our population so identical. And now, when it comes to disability in general, well, what actually is disability, I'll ask you all. Because we get all these different things. One's involving psychological matters, one's involving biological, one's involving behavior. Yeah, but there's all these different levels. But is there anything that all these disabilities have in common? I can't think of anything they've all got in common, every single one of them. So what actually is disability together? What does a disabled body look like? Yeah, if we've got all these different categories and so on of disability, or have we simply done what the eugenics movement did and just lumped them all together? because they were seen as social parasites. Then if any of you come up with the idea that, oh, but there's so much disabled people can't do that so-called able-bodied people can, well, it actually works in both directions, because disabled people can do things that non-disabled people can't. So what's the difference, really? The environment is the main difference of what causes the suffering. And another argument which comes up a lot, which I've seen so many, is, oh, us killing embryos, oh, it doesn't hurt anyone. Us selecting a baby, it doesn't hurt anyone. Actually, yes, it does. It even causes suicide. Because those of us disabled that you want to terminate, we know that you're thinking about us exactly what you're thinking about those embryos. We know that if we were that embryo, you would have done that to us, which gives out the message we are not wanted in this world, that you would actually murder us if it was legalized. Just like in Canada in 2016, they legalized assisted suicide. So if someone wanted to commit suicide, they actually allow them and actually assist them in doing so. Now, we've already got, I'm saying, autistic people can't donate embryos. We're already performing genocide on those with Down syndrome. So there's significant evidence already that CRISPR is just going to be used to abuse people, which is why I don't trust that. And now, so when it comes to quality of life, there's absolutely no correlation, no relationship between disability and quality of life. Such as, say, if we go back to IQ again with Black people, what Evelyn Fox Keller points out is an individual's IQ performance is actually dependent upon how they're being treated. Such as she points out that in a non-racist environment, Black people tend to flourish and do much better in their performance. But if they live in an environment where people have been persistently racist towards them, their IQ performance goes down. And since people's IQ is changing throughout the whole life, it's not really an ideal IQ at all. And the other part of here come up a lot and say, oh, but we don't want disabled people to suffer during their lives. I see something very problematic about that ideology, and it always tends to come from people who are not disabled. I would say that I can see there's a difference between being born disabled and becoming disabled during your life. I see quite a big difference. Often with my friends, I often point out to them that, well, there's two sides to every coin. There is. And you can't recognize one side if you don't recognize the other. So if you've never experienced suffering, you'd never experience joy. So in this case, when I was born disabled. So I've never experienced life as a non-disabled person. So I don't recognize life as a disabled person either. The life I've lived, it's just the way life is. But I say to my friends and so on, I'm glad that I was born disabled rather than becoming disabled later in life. And then they often ask me why. And I said, well, if I became epileptic at the age of 25, by that age, I might have learned to drive, I may have had a very good career, and so on. But suddenly becoming epileptic, I could lose my career for safety reasons. I would lose the right to drive. I would lose so much by becoming disabled after doing so much. But by being disabled from birth, I never went to that level to begin with. So those born disabled don't actually lose anything, but those who become disabled lose so much. And overall, I would actually say that the reason health disorders are on a constant rise altogether is because of the conspiracy of this ideological belief that there's any such thing as a normal human. So that's basically what the medical system does. It tries to modify humans to fit some ideological ideal, but there is no ideal whatsoever. So we're going to modifying things, treating things that don't even need to be treated. I assume so many of you have heard of Big Pharma. Big Pharma just sells disorders so they can sell drugs. And that's what numerous psychiatrists are pointing out. So I'd say altogether, eugenics, the fact of the matter, it gets used for discrimination. It's going to be used to abuse people. They don't even follow their own ethics code. Ridiculous terms come out of their mouths all the time. But those are go supporting it. They don't seem to acknowledge things to do with environmental factors, societal matters, but they actually overlook all of that. So altogether, I would say, no, we should have learned from the eugenics movement that we are not to do eugenics, that we're not to try playing God. And then also to point out, genetics are natural, neurology is natural. So if these are biological, our genetics and our brains, that means that our brains are part of biodiversity. And since neurodiversity is part of biodiversity, that means going and terminating all of this, it's more losses to biodiversity. And the losses of biodiversity have actually exceeded beyond the climate change crisis. So destroying more biology of the earth, destroying our genes because you don't like them, that's only going to make things even worse and make humans less adaptable. And altogether, when it comes to so-called disorders, so many of the papers that have associated disorders with genes have been retracted. Such as any papers that have related schizophrenia with genetics have been retracted because they've come to find out that these genes that get said to be the schizophrenic gene, apparently it's also in autistic people, it's found in those with ADHD, it's found in those without any disorder whatsoever. So is it really a schizophrenic gene? And it's said that it no more than 4% chance of contributing towards schizophrenia. And the found this among nearly all disorders. And another issue I've got with this idea of going for some kind of superior baby is that the idea that if you let fewer disabled people be born, a lot of communities that are found to make their social groups are going to shrink, and eventually they're just going to get pushed to the sidelines. They're not going to be part whatsoever in what is society meant to be. They're just going to be ignored. You know, scientists won't feel the need to do research to find cures to diseases anymore. If there's so few, they won't see the point in doing it. And those who actually do have legitimate diseases, they've got no hope. They'll just be left to die altogether. So I would say there's great problems with eugenic thinking. And on top of that, the individual, it's actually a violation of the bioethics code in general. If you see an embryo as a living organism, this genetic selection is going against its autonomy. And that's against the bioethics code. And it's things like uncertainty, in our world, things like unacceptance, no autonomy. These things are what contribute towards suicide, Alzheimer's disease. That's where disease comes from altogether, is by the way humans are being trapped, but by humans' experience. That's what determines whether they develop a disorder or not. And the fact of the matter about on gene testing, you can't test anything concerning the environment with those genes. Those genes are entirely isolated. You don't know whether the individual will actually develop a disease or not. So every human actually possesses genes that are associated with diseases. So if we're just going to abort every single baby that shows any sign towards developing some disease, basically what you're saying is you're going to terminate every single baby altogether. Those of you who are eugenic thinkers, you're suggesting that we don't allow any human to be born because they'll all share genes that are associated with diseases. So eugenic thinking is a thick and stupid idea all to begin with. The whole ideology of normal, again, it's plain absurd. Such as say one of the let's say the biggest country like China, because you often say about the whichever is the biggest is the normal ones. So if we think of the country China and then compare that to Ireland, the Irish, right? So since it's based on statistics, we are much more likely, if we randomly select someone, we're much more likely to get someone from China. Does that mean that those in China are more normal, are more healthy than those of the Irish? No. So it's plain absurd to claim that something's inferior just because there's fewer of it, just because it's a minority. That's plain absurd. So the whole idea of eugenics, I would say it's very easily debunked by those who are actually educated. I would say take a look at some of the things to do with biodiversity loss on land, and you might be surprised of how much it's exceeded climate change. Then it might make you want to pause and have second thoughts. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.